before you depicts the ground that is relevant to this talk. It covers in the top left Rhodesia, as it was then known, and to the south a small piece of South Africa, particularly the Kruger Park. To the east of both territories lies the southern part of Mozambique, and in particular the province of Gaza, over which much of Op Uric took place. International borders between these three countries are highlighted in blue and red. Places in Mozambique that concern us are the capital Maputo, at the bottom of the page, Canicado and Chiputo northeast from there, and the river confluences close by. Moving further north and up the line of rail and road is the town of Mabalon, and further still the town of Mapai. The road and rail lines exit Mozambique at Chiquaraquara, or more commonly referred to as Malvernia. Other points and towns of interest include Chibugu, Machalia, and Masingena in the centre of frame. All roads and tracks are marked as seen. Points of interest relevant to this talk in South Africa are Hoedspruit, a large South African Air Force base just south of Phalaborwa, and of course Bafuri, or Crook's Corner, where the three countries meet on the Limpopo River. Points of interest relevant to this operation in Rhodesia include Harare, previously Salisbury, Masvingo, previously Fort Victoria, and further south still, the town of Cherezi, with a spot on the Rundi River, Chipunda Pools, which will be discussed later. Insofar as the topography and climate are concerned, all ground south of Cherezi can be described as semi-arid, with Mopani bushveld and thick black cotton soil. Many shallow pans are scattered about these environs. They hold water in summer and become dried mud in the winter. The area is very flat and lightly grassed throughout, growing up to waist height in summer, but more often than not tending to ankle height. It burns easily. Insofar as distances are concerned, Maputo to Mapai is about 460 kilometers, Mapai to the Rhodesian border a further 80 kilometers, and Cherezi 170 kilometers further north. As mentioned before, the area is extremely flat, with Mapai 700 feet above sea level, Malvernia 1400 feet above sea level, and Cherezi about the same height. The climate is dry and generally hot throughout the year, with daily temperatures ranging between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius, cooling to 15 to 23 degrees during the night. Rainfall varies along the coastline considerably more than inland, which experiences about 400 millimeters per annum. Ground mist, which sweeps in from the Mozambique Channel, is a frequent visit to the whole of the Gaza province and to the southeast of Rhodesia. Dealing now with the enemy dispositions at the time that Uric took place. Op Uric actually was the Rhodesian name for this operation, and it was known to the South African National Defence Force as Operation Bootlace. It was estimated that at the time there were about 3,500 FPLM and Zanla enemy deployed in the Gaza province. The FPLM were extremely well equipped by African standards of the day. They had a regiment of T-34 tanks, numerous armoured cars, BTR armoured personnel carriers, artillery, heavy mortars, and a capable anti-aircraft capability. 37mm radar-controlled cannons, 23mm, 14.5, and any amount of 12.7mm guns. At Mapai, they deployed a flat-faced radar, which in the active role could detect aircraft as far afield as Cherezi. Radar is generally used in either a passive role or an active role. Used in the passive role, it detects aircraft or missiles, but emits no signal, so it cannot be detected by any surveillance equipment. When it is turned to the active role, it emits a pulse, which can be detected by enemy surveillance equipment. In the active role, it is used to track and to engage targets, both on the ground and in the air. FPLM infantry were armed with the usual assortment of communist infantry weapons: the AK rifle, the RPD machine gun, 2-inch handheld mortars, and any number of RPG rocket launchers, which they used to great effect in both the ground and the anti-aircraft role. The FPLM were generally extremely aggressive, particularly when they outnumbered their quarry, which was frequently the case. 4. When pursuing a small and lightly armed Rhodesian patrol. If they had any difficulty with any enemy, they would sit quietly and patiently by and wait for reinforcements. If you examine the key in the bottom right of this map, you will notice where there is a red circle displayed, i.e. Mapai or Malvernia, that indicates that an infantry company or more of the enemy, and maybe frequently a battalion, plus a large field headquarters, are in operation. The FPLM made extensive use of what they termed mobiles, a motorized column consisting of a couple of armoured cars escorting 4 or 5 soft-skinned vehicles carrying infantry, perhaps an APC or 2, and a number of 12.7 or 14.5 anti-aircraft guns. These were beefed up by plenty of RPG rocket launchers. These mobile columns, 4 in this case, roamed the roads as directed by their relevant headquarters, and were handily available to engage any hostile movement on the ground and in the air. Any number of foot patrols were deployed along the lines of road and rail to detect enemy movement. They were at least a section and could be a platoon or more in strength. In conclusion, the FPLM were not an enemy to be taken lightly, for they had much experience in operating in what the Rhodesians euphemistically called the Russian front. Ever since about 1976, Rhodesian troops had conducted operations in Gaza with varying degrees of success. The Russian front was a battleground of some note, and the line of road and rail had witnessed the demise of many trains and a great amount of wheeled transport. Many Freds, as the Frelimo jokingly called, had also come to grief, as had their Zanla counterparts. Turning now to friendly force assets, let us deal first of all with the aircraft allocated to this task. Hawker Hunter FGA aircraft, ex-Thornhill base near Gwello, 6 Canberra bombers, of which 3 were from the South African Air Force. Interestingly enough, during the days of Federation, the then Chief of Air Staff, Air Vice Marshal Bentley, an ex-Plumtree boy in fact, was of the opinion that the Central African Federation had too many Canberras and sold a number to South Africa, including many components. It wasn't a wise move, as it turned out. Unusual for a Plumtree boy. The Canberras operated out of Fieldy, a new and fairly sophisticated Rhodesian Air Force base near Hartley. 12 Dakotas were available for this operation, 4 from the SAF, 4 Lynx light aircraft, 6 Bell 205 helicopters, and 11 Alouettes from the Rhodesian Air Force, 12 Puma and 2 Super Frelon helicopters from the SAF. Finally, and to be used as a last resort, a number of Mirage F1 and Buccaneer aircraft based at SAF Hoedspruit were available. Insofar as ground and paratroops were concerned, the SAS were to provide 112 soldiers, the RLI 192 men from 1 and support commandos, 1 recce commando of the South African Defence Force under command of the SAS, a specialist demolition engineer detachment, as well as various intelligence and other resources. In order to facilitate deployment, the TAC headquarters of the SAS and the RLI set themselves up at Chipunda Pools. This base also had large stocks of fuel, water and landmines, and was to be forwarded to the forward assembly area deep in Mozambique and southeast of Djibouti. This base was the primary jumping-off point for the bridge demolition parties, the mining parties, and the troops allocated to the exploitation of Mapai. It also contained a small protection party and first-line medical backup. The South African Air Force commitment to this operation was the highest order. There's been some unwarranted remarks made about certain aspects of their airmanship. In every respect, they were outstanding, extremely professional and experienced, for many of their crews had served in Rhodesian Alouettes earlier in the conflict. It is worth noting that large helicopters and formations of them required a very different modus operandi. They were fast and took up an awful lot of airspace. They required a totally different approach when routing and landing.
Well, Nigel, I'm sorry it's taken so long, but I'm happy to be back with celebrated soldier and author Nigel Henson. Nigel, yeah, I mean, I had to take some time off to go to France. I don't think the Springboks would have made it without me. me and Cyril Ramaphosa, bloody idiot.
Oh, well,
he really wrecked it for me.
Well, I'm sure you pushed him over that line. You were with at one point.
yeah, played a huge role in the whole thing. But geez, what a rugby fiesta it was. Really quite something.
4 years ago, I was at the one in Japan, but I mean, this one seems to be much better vibe and everything.
Yeah, it really. I thought the French did a great job. There was a fantastic atmosphere, but I must say it was a bit disappointing. The final, the booing was pretty out of hand. The French came out very strongly against the Boks. I'm not 100% sure why, but still, it was a hell of an experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Boks beat them. That's probably why they did that.
Yeah, that's right. I think that is. But Nigel, let's get back to where you sort of left it with John, and back to the whole story of Op Uric and the attack on Mapai, which really was, I suppose, a sort of watershed moment in a way in the Rhodesian war. And you very, very well placed to talk us through it and give us some perspectives. I know there are different views on this thing, and I always think that that's quite a healthy development when you've got people who were there, who've got different views, different perspectives. It just makes it all that much more interesting. But this was arguably the biggest battle of the Rhodesian War. And I think it's true to say it didn't go exactly according to plan, but that's enough from me. I wonder, Nigel, if we could just go back to, if you just take us through sort of chronologically with events leading up to the actual attack, how it all unfolded in your recollection.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'll deal with that a little bit later. But okay. The first map that I've got, because we're covering such a large amount of ground, it's important that the viewers actually have an idea of and perspective of how large of ground we're covering, exactly where each place is. Because if you're talking about Djibouti or somewhere like that, I mean, to a guy that hasn't got a map in front of him, it's absolutely meaningless.
Right.
So what I've done is, the first map, I'm just describing the photography and everything. John, there's a voiceover in that which really sets the scene for the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I'd like to do after that, I'd like to set the kind of intelligence and political background to this thing so that everyone's in the picture. Now, there were very, very good reasons, for military reasons, for doing Op Uric, because it was estimated that in about mid-1979, there were about 10,000 guerrillas inside Rhodesia. And about 50 to 60% of them, it was estimated by the intelligence office, had come through the Gaza province to the south of Rhodesia. And that's really the area that concerns us here. Now, Bill Buckle, who was a guy from JSPIS, which is Joint Services Photo Interpretation Section, quite early in 1979, did a kind of intelligence assessment and a kind of strategic overview of what needed to be done to halt this ingress of terrorists into Rhodesia. And he came to the conclusion that actually there were 5 bridges just north of Maputo in the various rivers and Limpopo, and its confluences that needed to be taken out. And provided those 5 bridges were to a large extent dropped, it would halt all rail and road traffic from Maputo, which was the port where most of these guerrillas were landing from Tanzania and various other places. And they would have a great deal of difficulty. They'd virtually have to foot it from there all the way to the Rhodesian border. And these bridges really were Changani River, Chibutu, Canal River near Chokwe, there's Nchopes River, and a very big river at Barajem, a very big bridge at Barajem, and another bridge at Kanikado. And those really were the key to actually halting this movement into Gaza and then into Rhodesia. Also key in this whole military situation was about halfway up the railway line between Villa Salazar, which was or Malvernia, which was the entry point into Rhodesia, and Maputo was a small, a reasonable sized village called Mabalon. And there was a fairly large logistics base there with a vehicle park, plenty of workshops, fuel storage, and a large ammunition and fuel supplies. The other key thing to this was the 2 Brigade headquarters a little bit further up the railway line, which was Mapai, and it was the brigade headquarters that had a battalion there, and it really controlled all the military activities that took place in the Gaza province. The further target was really up by Malvernia. If you went up the Rhodesian border, only a few kilometers, there was a microwave station or a troposcatter, and that formed part of the air defenses of Mozambique along the border. In July 1979, there was a further military paper presented by a guy called Scotty McCormack from MID, and he reviewed all the strategic targets and the threat posed by the continued use of the Gaza province by Zanla. And coincidentally, around about that time, there was a meeting between Sabora Michel and Mugabe and their military chiefs, and it led to a political agreement amongst them that actually Zanla and Frelimo were to integrate their forces, both in Gaza and inside Rhodesia, the ones inside. And Frelimo would also give 1,000 soldiers to Zanla to be deployed with Zanla into Rhodesia. And all of these forces would be controlled by the Frelimo headquarters, 2 Brigade headquarters at Mapai. This was actually confirmed not long afterwards when a Frelimo soldier was captured at Kezi, which is kind of southwest of Bulawayo, and he confirmed that all these things had taken place. So there was a very, very strong case for actually doing something about these strategic pockets in the Gaza province of Mozambique. Before I get on to the political aspects of this thing, I'd just like to discuss, because maybe yourself and a whole lot of the listeners don't really know how some of this intelligence was gained. Now, generally speaking, and I think it's subjects that you and John need to take up, because it's a very fertile ground and it hasn't really been covered so far, is that the background to all of this would start when someone was captured in Rhodesia or just over the border, an intruder, and he would be interrogated. And he think, where were the bases that you stopped at after your trading on your way into Rhodesia? And they'd say, oh, I think it was kind of around whatever. And then as a result of that, what they would do is they would try and pinpoint all these bases on this route, and they would carry out air photography. Now, the crowd that actually we're concerned with here is a crowd called JSPIS, which is Joint Services Photo Interpretation Center. And that was led by a guy called Squadron Leader Bill Buckle. Now, Bill operated out of New Zealand very closely with 5 Squadron. And they did such sterling work because they would be given an area and they would send 5 Squadron out, and gradually they would sift through this area doing run after run after run of photographing the area and then they would leach out what they thought were the important areas that needed more definition. And so consequently, they would go back and do reruns on these things, both with hunters, because Hunter had a camera pod mounted under one of its wings, and very powerful cameras in the cameras. And gradually they would build up a picture of these places. That might be confirmed later by ground recce, long distance recce patrols, either that's Blue Scouts or the SAS, who would drop halo, generally speaking, into the area to confirm that was actually the place. And a lot of these external operations that took place afterwards, the commanders like myself and all the other guys would be given an aerial photograph of the target, probably about the size of your computer. And it would be divided into squares, A, B, C, D, E, F along the top, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because in those days, there were no maps of these places. So you couldn't, if you wanted a jet strike, you couldn't actually say, I want to go to grid reference 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had to refer to the air photograph, and the pilot also had it, and you'd say, okay, look at square D3. Okay, and he'd say, yeah. He'd say, right. If you see there's a large building to the right of it, there's a bit of bush, and just south of it, there's what looks like a trench thing. Yes, well, there's an anti-aircraft gun in there. Please take that out. And so that's the way it was done. Now, when and you remember Operation Al Cora, which was really the combination of South Africa, Portugal, and Rhodesia agreeing to work together. In the early days in the early 1970s, when I was a subaltern, myself and a lot of guys like Jerry Strong and those guys would take tracking teams into Mozambique, and we would work with the Mozambique army. And in those days, there were no maps. So, what we would be given would be like a roll of wallpaper where you'd roll this thing out. And there were like 2 or 3 lines across the whole thing. And it was all in latitude and longitude. Now, when you were dropped, actually, it became bloody difficult for you to actually, when speaking to John Hickman or someone back, to say, hey, listen, we're out here. Because, I mean, you didn't have anything to refer to. So, I mean, we would start off by establishing that actually we knew where we had started from. And we'd say, okay, we reckon we are about a handspan northeast of where we started from. And if you look at there's another, where that grid line does a funny thing there, you will see that actually we think we're around about there. I can't emphasize how much work JSPS and the South Africans did and 5 Squadron, because by the time, 5 years later, the whole of Mozambique was mapped right up to, I think, the Rukana River, or even further, and Zambia as well. So actually, we had high definition, 150,000 maps, which we'd never had in the old days. So it made one's life a hell of a lot easier. And I mean, I can remember, I was doing Fire Force once in about end of early 1979 up in Marymount Mission, somewhere around there. And Keith Spence, who'd been my K-car pilot about 3 months before, he was, I was with some other guy, and Keith had been sent back to 5 Squadron. And we were in the middle of this joust, and suddenly Keith back at 5 Squadron, I heard this, hello, Major. And I said, what's you? What are you doing there? And he said, have your snaps. And he was like over Lake Malonga. And a lot of they used to listen to all the Fire Force sets. I mean, most of the VOAC aircraft that came over would be listening into the Fire Force frequencies and all the rest, and maybe they even had tapes on board to tape some of the stuff. But I mean, that just shows, how far the Fire Force Squadron guys went up in Mozambique, considerable distance. And it was an ongoing task between themselves and South Africa. And really, they did a marvelous job because, as I say, it took them 4 or 5 years, and the whole place had been mapped properly. The other thing I want to talk about is, so we've got air for photographs, we've now got maps. The other thing that I want to talk about is, and maybe you can again get a guy like George Galbraith, who was the signals officer for a time, the SAS. There was a 8 signal squadron. I don't know if you know it. 8 signal squadron was based at Wingate, just outside Wingate Golf Course in the western, and they were the intercept people. Okay, and they did nothing but intercept and decode all the signals in that came in. And it was actually a very, very sophisticated thing. And they would send their reports to MID, and those got processed as and when on a need-to-know basis, rather like Alan Turing's thing in the last war.
Right.
You couldn't actually give away resources. So I mean, as and when required, no, these were distributed because they gave very, very good. So those were some of the methods that we used to get this long-range intelligence necessary for the planners and the people who made the decisions to make the correct assessments and the correct and ensure that the correct outcomes. Turning now to a very interesting and highly controversial subject is the political background to Opurig. Because, most of the grunts like myself and other guys tended to think that there were very good military reasons for it. But in fact, the reason why that operation took place was purely political. We're talking about early September. CHOGM, which was the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, had taken place from the 1st to the 10th of August, a few weeks before, in Lusaka. And there it had been agreed by all the Commonwealth Heads of Government that there was to be a conference held at Lancaster House. The Zimbabwe Rhodesian government were to be invited, as were the various insurgent organizations, that's ZANDA, and in Kermisgrove. But that was fine. I think the reason why the operation took place was purely political, nothing else. Of course, they couldn't persuade Mugabe to come to the school. Mugabe would not have come. He was giving everyone the finger. Nkomo was told that he had to go by Kaunda, but Mugabe was his own agent, he didn't have to go. And so consequently, some pressure needed to be put on Samora Machel, which was the reason for this operation. Now, it subsequently emerged that if we didn't do the damage to Mozambique that we did, and Frelimo refused actually to pressurize Mugabe to go to the conference, that in fact there was another operation planned shortly afterwards, where all the communications in Manica land, in the Manica province of Mozambique, and then in the Tet province of Mozambique, were to be actually taken down until such time as Frelimo got to hell in Mugabe and said, "You damn well go to that conference and you stay there." That was really the catalyst that forced him to go there.
Nigel, can I just jump in there? Just something I want to ask you at this point. When did the South Africans get involved? Were they involved sort of all along? But that was quite a big turn of events for the South Africans to get as involved as they did.
Well, I hate being a conspiracy theory guy, but it's my undertaking, it's my assessment, having looked at this thing, that actually the Brits, I mean, every time we went anywhere near Mozambique or went to Mozambique, there was a magnificent outcry from the Brits and from the Europeans and from the Americans and everyone. Now, funny, what outcry was there about this one? There was no outcry. There was no outcry about the South Africans being so heavily involved in this. And I'm saying that I think that actually this was done with the tacit
of the Brits, because they
approval of the Brits,
well,
and actually the South Africans got involved. And I mean, the Brits, it was helping their aim, so they weren't going to complain about South African involvement.
Yeah.
So it suited every party that, in fact, this thing took place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one can figure around with conspiracy theories and all the rest of it, but I'm quite sure that the Zimbabwe Rhodesian government, the South African government, and the Brits were party to what went on, because there was no political outcry whatsoever and the Americans, from any quarter, about what took place there. And that was the only lever that they had to club Michelle with, who was going to club Mugabe with. Otherwise, the boys wouldn't have even attended the conference.
Yeah, it adds up.
Yeah, and that also, I think the SAS were going to be involved in phase 2 and phase 3, and maybe the RLI of these taking down the communications in Manica and in Tet. But that then left the SAS free to get on in Zambia and start messing around with all the communications, and to stop that Zipro armored column, because that would have just, I think, added, complicated the matter. Their intervention would have complicated the matter at Lancaster House. And of course, that you had this chap, Peter Carrington, wandering around, lubricating between this party and that party, and cheering everyone. I mean, everyone was friends with him, but I mean, Mugabe hated Kaunda, and he hated Nkomo, and the Rhodesians hated all of them and all the rest of it. But the one friend that they had was my dear friend Peter Carrington, because everyone seemed to love. And I don't know if you know the story about Peter Carrington and his involvement in Operation Market Garden.
Well, he got a military cross. He was in the Grenadiers, I think.
Yeah, but no, there's more to it than that. In the leading tank battalion. And he had a platoon of four tanks with him. And they crossed the Wild River, which was the last one before the Rhine at Arnhem. And the Americans who'd been trying to cross by boat, infantry, paratroopers, had a hell of a time. And I mean, they were shot to pieces and all the rest of it. But eventually some of them made it across. And Carrington's troop of 4 tanks was sitting on the other side of the Nemagen Bridge, where they'd been told to stop. And Carrington was sitting there as the lead tank, and these Americans sort of pitched up and said, "Come on, you've got to now really push to get to Arnhem quickly, because those guys are in all kinds of trouble." And Carrington said, "Well, actually, I've got no orders to proceed, and in any case, I'm writing a postcard to Mummy or something like that, And the American platoon commander then threatened Carrington with his submachine gun, and he said, "I'm going to shoot you unless you get your tanks moving on that road." And Carrington, before he loaded the hatch of his Sherman, said to others, "Well, actually, I'm just going to have a bit of a brew up," and closed the hatch of his tank, and then the Yanks could do nothing. And in fact, I understand that those tanks waited another 18 hours before they actually pushed onto Arnhem, and they could have saved the day. So I mean, Peter Carrington got all these kind of awards for being such a brave guy. And if you read all of his abilities, how marvelous he was. I mean, there's a little bit more to that story than actually meets the eye. Anyway, Carrington greasing his way, lubricating his way around the continent, and that's really the political background.
So Nigel, let's just jump in here now and talk about your involvement, if you don't mind.
Okay, what happened?
How it came to you, what your orders were, what your particular role was.
Okay, about 3 or 4 days before the operation took place, I was asked to. We were doing fire force, I think, at Enterprise, which was literally 20 k's north of Harare. I was asked to go to the RLI for a briefing, and my commander was told to pack up, drive to Buffalo Range.
So I got in my, went and had this chat with our intelligence officers. We had two guys there. One was a guy called Ian Cuthbertson, and the other guy was a guy called Brian Street. You probably remember Brian Street.
Yes, yes.
He was a correspondent for the Rhodesia sports correspondent.
Yeah.
And I was amazed because, I mean, I went into the RLI. They had two tents, a big marquee on the outside of the ops room. They gave me an overall view of what was going to happen on the op. And I was told that I was going to go to Buffalo Range, and I was going to take 4 paraloads of troops down to south of Mabalan, where we were going to be dropped on the railway line. And we were going to ambush the railway line and get on this line of low koppies. And we were actually to stop any movement north. Well, I mean, I thought to myself, I can't actually believe that I'm going to go all the way down there, and with very little support to no one, and we're just going to ambush this thing anyway. So I said, all right, well, I mean, we do what we've got to do. So I then was flown to Buffalo Range, where in fact support commander had just arrived, and I was then briefed that actually no, the plan's changed. You're not going to be dropped at Mabalan. You're going to take your 4 or 5 Paradax, and you're going to be dropped into the admin area southeast of Djibouti, in Mozambique, where you're going to carry out a raid on Mapai. So, I mean, Norman Walsh was in this briefing party at Rhodesia when we talked about. I thought to myself, well, I mean, that's what it is. That's what it is. So the next day, we saddled up, and we were told that we were going to be dropped into this great big great big pan, but it actually had a little bit of water in it, and ilala palms and all. So I thought to myself, but I mean, why? Surely there's not water in this pan in the middle of at the end of winter. I mean, it could be nothing. Must be dry. Anyway, they said no, definitely water there, and so I put on my water wings, and we inflamed, and the next day, which was what was D-Day on the thing, we actually got paradropped into this pan, which incidentally was dry, thank God, in the middle of Mozambique. And there we waited for things to unfold. We were given a further briefing about what was going to happen at Mapai, and we sat and waited. Now, that was the day before the thing on Mapai. We were ordered to attack Mapai. I think even in the minds of the planners who'd issued these directives and issued these instructions, they weren't quite sure what they expected of us, let alone we expected, know what we expected of ourselves. Anyway, that is the situation. And I mean, if we had captured Mapai, I mean, it's a bit like a dog running off the bus. What happens when he catches the bus? You've got a bigger liability when you capture the bus than you ever had before, because you've then got to defend it, you've got to supply it, and all the other issues that go with it. Was a little bit of an unsure situation.
Yeah. Who was giving you your orders? Who was actually running the show at this stage? Who was calling the shots?
As far as I can recall, it was some MID guys at Buffalo Range who were giving us the orders. And Norman Walsh was there. And then when I got into the admin area after we parachuted in there, there was I think it was Pat Armstrong had flown in from the admin area at Flinders Pools and given us the orders. I can't really recall actually, but I mean there was sufficient doubt. That's exactly what our task was. What happened was D-Day, which was meant to be 4th of September, was delayed till the 5th of September from Mozambique. And in fact, flying conditions and parachuting conditions and all the other issues were pretty problematical weather-wise. So D-Day was delayed by 1 day.
Mm.
And the idea on D-Day was that there would be an airborne reserve of 30 parachutists, which would leave at 5 o'clock in the morning and orbit throughout the day in case that we needed wherever things got a little bit tough. At 7 o'clock in the morning, 4 hunters would strike Berejem, and all the bridges in the area that we talked about before. And then at 7:05, all the Pumas and the heavy helicopters that would have come from the pools to the internal admin area would pick up 168 troops, mostly SAS, some one recce, and some one commando, and head south to the 5 bridges to demolish them. That was delayed considerably because the troops guarding the admin area near Djibouti, there suddenly appeared a Frelimo patrol of about 30 or 40 soldiers. And they were dealt with by one guarding that. And I think 29 out of the 30, something like that, were killed and 1 was captured. But that delayed the whole HR thing. Simultaneous with the movement of the troops to the bridges, there would be other troops dropped by helicopter on the roads to the east and south of the admin area with instructions to mine all these roads, and to the west. And considerable airstrikes would take place into the Berejem area, which is where all the 5 bridges were. Airstrikes on Mabalan and on the Troposcatter. Those all took place, but there was quite a lot. There was quite a lot of delay because of this incident and then the airstrikes went in, and the bridges. I wasn't there, but I mean, I think we've heard quite a lot about the demolition squads on the bridges. They did an SAS, one recce, and one did a wonderful job of downing all these bridges. Dick Paxton and a cheetah was ordered into the area to Kazavak, an SAS guy who slightly, and incoming, and he flew over some Freds, and his aircraft got hit by an RPG rocket, and unfortunately his tech was killed, and his aircraft downed. But on the other side of the river, there was the SAS, who had just recently captured an anti-aircraft gun, and they turned the anti-aircraft gun on all the Frelimo guys who had shot the aircraft down. And then subsequently, the tech plus Dick were actually moved out of the area. And by and large, I mean, some of those bridges, I think Berejem about 5 hours to wire up and put the charges on, set the charges and blow the bridges. And the big bridge, which was at Berejem, the railway line had been, the rail arch had been a big chunk, but the road part was partially damaged, and light traffic was still there. And then at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the helicopters returned with all the demolition parties on board. And in the end, obviously, on all the other targets, there's a considerable amount of mining that takes place